Thank you so much. This is such a lovely event. So, yes, my name is Liz Hickok. I'm a San Francisco artist. And this piece in the show at the new museum is actually a photograph of a large mural, a large public art piece that I put up on Market Street in San Francisco last summer as COVID was sort of, you know, the shelter in place was really going strong. And so the piece in the show is a photograph of another art piece, which I've done fairly consistently in my artwork. It's sort of multiple layers. But other than that, it's actually a real departure from what I normally do. For years, I've been creating these pretty highly constructed otherworldly scenes, kind of like little dioramas that I then photograph and make videos of, very elaborate, often using very delicate materials like crystals or jello. And then the shelter in place happened, and I have a child who has to be at home for school. And it's so interesting because, you know, Shelby, you were just saying that you were able to make more art because of this. And I ended up sort of having to pause my studio practice and shift gears. And it really, changed what I was able to get done, but I still wanted to be creative. So I don't know about a lot of you, but I actually sort of was only able to get the bare minimum done most of the time. So in order to stay creative during the beginning of the shelter in place, I would go into my backyard and photograph the beautiful orange California poppies in my yard. And that would sort of ground me and keep me sane. And, it brought me a lot of joy. And so that was pretty much the minimum of what I could do. And at about that same time in San Francisco, a lot of artists and organizations were bringing art out onto the street. They were putting up big murals onto all the boarded up buildings along Market Street and just all over the city. And it was such a hard time. And seeing all these murals was just really amazing. So I wanted to join in on that. And so I decided to take these photographs that I was creating and then take them a step further and work on them more. And it ended up being this wonderful sort of new little experimental project I started during COVID. And it provided an opportunity to collaborate with my partner, who is a data scientist and a programmer. And we had been wanting to collaborate for a long time and been inspired by various things to try and work together. So actually, if you go to the next slide, this is the mural, one of the murals. It was actually a 3-part project. And so these are 2 of the images that ended up going up. And then if you go to the slide after that, the image on the left is actually the Gowanus Canal. And it's this incredibly polluted water in Brooklyn that I had been really inspired by in a previous summer. And it had actually inspired my partner, my wife, to create a program using code to interpret photographs or images that we input and distort them in a way that was inspired by this incredibly polluted but beautiful water. And so this was the time I decided now I couldn't go into the studio so much, but I could work with her to take my poppies and distort them and push them. And while they're beautiful and inspiring and colorful, they also sort of hint at this toxic kind of distortion. And I felt like a lot of us were feeling a bit like that. And as well, a lot of you have been talking about the wildfires. The poppies also really felt a lot to me like fire. And they are really amazing, hardy wildflowers that are some of the first flowers to come back, some of the first plants to come back after fires. And so they felt like a really good interpretation of that. So if you go back to the last slide. So I worked on these images with my partner and played with them a lot. It was a really playful, nice sort of experiment to work with her and to play around with these images. And I managed to partner with a really wonderful organization called 100 Days Action, who got funding to help put up these pieces as we pasted images along Market Street in my neighborhood in the Castro, and my neighborhood really needed some love. There was just so many boarded up buildings. It felt really hard, and so putting these images up just felt like it was bringing some color and life. And it was, I live around the corner, and they are still up, many months later, and it's been really wonderful to go back, several times a week, and to see people interacting and sort of just really responding to it. But it's also been interesting to see how the weather and dirt and graffiti have changed the pieces over time, and the texture on the walls. And as a photographer, it's just really changed the work hugely to see these photographs up on these public walls getting, scratched and marked up and painted on. And so that was where I've really been enjoying I go and I touch them up and I paint on them. So the murals are really evolving over the months. It kind of has become this little conversation between the graffiti, the people adding the graffiti, and then I paint them out, and I talk to passersby as I'm doing that. And so if you go back to the first slide, you can see how this photograph, I went back and I started photographing the murals themselves and the way the light played on them, the way the architecture changed them, and it just added a whole nother layer to the photographs and the original images. And I really like how the art on the street has been such a key part of this time of sheltering in place, since we can't go into galleries as much. And so I just have really enjoyed that sort of cycle of the whole project. And thankfully, it's been really nice. That little experimental project that I thought I'd just kind of do quickly has then led to new work. And now I'm working on a new public art project in Palo Alto that's from the same series, and is going to involve an augmented reality element. So if you go, it's going to go up, I think maybe even next week or the week after, and you download an app, you can point it at the mural that there's an image on the very last slide. Sorry to keep making you change slides, but on the last slide, there's that image is going to be the image up in Palo Alto, and you can point your phone at it and it will start moving like a little bit like fire. It's sort of more evoking fire this time, water and fire, and there'll be a soundscape. And so I'm excited that it's now evolved into an interactive project as well. That's it.
Thank you, Liz. It's fascinating to hear about how your work has evolved in a public space. I love that.